Okay, so today I have for you guys a unique deck from the Pro Tour in Atlanta, Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. Does anyone have an idea? Does this look familiar? Maybe it does not. Well, this is my deck that I took to the Pro Tour, and it is a green-white mid-range deck that I ended up coming up with basically at the last possible second preparing for this tournament. I was kind of not really loving anything, and this deck had some potential, and I ended up deciding to play it. And I went 6-4 with it in the tournament. Maybe could have won another match or two, but in any case, I do like the deck. And the mana base, I'm not playing any Flower to Flourishes in the list because I like just having a bunch of lands that come into play untapped, but and you also don't get that much bonus out of the flourish, but the reason to play that card is you have your colors, you have both of your colors more often if you play Flower to Flourish. So there are 25 lands and 6 mana creatures, so basically half the deck is mana, which means that you are in a little bit of danger of flooding out, but at the same time, you are more likely to be able to play your high power cards, and since there aren't Explore cards, you kind of need a number of lands. So 4 Llanowar Elves, 2 Druid of the Cowl for your mana accelerants into your Planeswalkers. The Tocatli Honor Guards are the reason why you have a favorable Golgari matchup. That card really stops the Explorer mechanic, and the Wild Growth Walkers. Knight of Grace is also pretty solid against Golgari. Now, if you don't expect a lot of Golgari, then maybe your 2-drop slot is going to be a little bit different than mine, but going into the Pro Tour, I expected it to be one of the most played strategies. Then we have Baffling End. This is kind of the 2-mana removal spell that green-white has access to. And it is great at dealing with cards like Adanto Vanguard, Llanowar Elves, Explore creatures. So I've liked it. Of course, it's not great against control. Sometimes it's just a dead card. But the control matchup game 1 is just pretty bad for this deck anyways. And there's 4 History of Benalias. You need a 3-drop slot that does not have an ETB effect, and History of Benalia is just kind of the format-defining white 3-mana play. So I'm playing 4 Histories. Then the Karn is kind of the way that this deck flows. You play Karn, you hopefully are able to find a way to keep it on the battlefield, and then over a number of turns, it can really take over. Ajani is also fairly strong if you're able to get aggressive, and is one of your best cards in the control matchups. Sometimes you're able to minus it to get back your Tocatli against black-green. As long as you have a Tocatli in play against black-green, you're going to be in good shape. Ixalan's Binding is a flexible removal spell I like a lot. Sometimes you're able to strand cards in your opponent's hand with it. So I like it in this list much more than Conclave Tribunal, for instance. And say you're playing against Is It Drakes and you're able to get a Drake, then that shuts off 1/3 of your opponent's creatures for the entire rest of the game. It's also good against Planeswalkers, just a very flexible removal spell that I've been happy with. Vivien Reid is another card advantage Planeswalker, similar to Karn. You're really looking to find your Lyras and your Carnage Tyrants off of it. Or sometimes you're able to just tick up, and then ultimate your Vivien Reids. And then it's also got the down tick, being able to get rid of an artifact or enchantment. So very flexible, powerful Planeswalker. Lyra is your best card in multiple matchups against Mono Red or against Celestia. This is the card that you're relying on. You're hoping to get it. Sorry, not Celestia, against Boros. Though any of the white weenie decks, the white decks that are so popular right now, this is the card you're hoping to get into play, have it stick in play, and then it can hold off your opponent's attacks. Carnage Tyrant, kind of the flip side of that, it's at its best against control, but it can still close the game out in a number of matchups. Sideboard, a lot of times you're taking out the Tocatlis and bringing in Knight of Autumn, very powerful card. Death Gorge, I like a lot. It's flexible. It's at its best against Izzet Drakes if you're able to get an Arclight Phoenix of your opponents. Adanto Vanguard comes in against control. It comes in alongside these Squire's Devotions against the red decks that have no real way to actually remove Adanto Vanguard besides shocking it or something like that. If you're able to play turn 2 Adanto Vanguard, turn 3 Squire's Devotion in those matchups, it's going to be absolutely insane. A couple additional spot removal spells, and then a more sweeper type effect in Settle the Wreckage for those aggressive decks. And then a Johnny, I'm boarding this in against Golgari and against control. So this is the Celestia deck. I like it. I wouldn't say it's anything busted or anything like that, but it's another deck in the format that is well positioned for the current metagame. And I'm looking forward to kind of show it off to you guys today. Looks like we will be going first for this one, and we have potential turn 3 Vivien Reid. So easy keep for sure. Get our mana dorks out there. Let's see what our opponent can muster up. Maybe after seeing that Sacred Foundry, we're against Jeskai, maybe? Like, the white decks normally have 1-drops, so like, if we're against a Boros deck, it would be a little bit unusual to not have a 1-drop. But we'll get in there, see what our opponent does this next turn. Okay, Clifftop Retreat. Lightning Strike. Alright, well, wasn't really expecting that sequence. It is kind of annoying because it means we're not getting this Vivien into play this turn. Hopefully we don't get both of these Llanowar Elves swept away by like a Deafening Clarion or something. Although our opponent may just be playing a red-white deck of some sort. Doesn't seem to be super aggressive though. History's good and annoying. Now we have a bit of a decision. Drew Lyra for turn. Very powerful card if left unanswered. We could play the Vivien though, which I kind of like doing. I think we just play Vivien, ticket up. We just want to be able to get some advantage from our Planeswalker here. Unclear if this Tocatli is good in the matchup, but I will take it. And so we may be put into a situation where we're going to want to run out the Lyra and hope our opponent doesn't have a removal spell, which isn't the best spot to be in. I'm okay with the Vivien going to 4. We saw Lightning Strike. Okay, Steam Vents gives us a little bit more of an idea of what may be going on here in the matchup. There's a Carnage Tyrant. I think we take that and just play it. We're worried about potential counter magic. It can block a knight when this history reaches its 3rd chapter. And see, looks like maybe some card. Okay, Wrath Capuchin. Yep, that's pretty good. That's going to be a way to kill our Vivien Reid, unfortunately. So a little Jeskai Historic going on here. So we do get to eat one of these knights, it looks like. I wouldn't be surprised if our opponent had access to cards like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Okay, there is an angel package as well, so a lot going on with this deck that we're up against. The Resplendent Angel in particular is fairly worrisome. I think we want to get rid of that. But we could also just jam our Lyra, I guess, as well. Interesting choice there. Although, if we binding the angel now, it prevents future angels from coming down. Yeah, I kind of like that. And we want to get in with the Carnage Tyrant, start our clock. I think we're a bit ahead in the race. Now, this isn't one of the more typical standard decks, so we have these cards like Tocatli that are more geared towards the Golgaris of the format, you know, and it's not looking quite as good here, but it does block these knights pretty well. Ooh, we're Kindling Phoenix. That is annoying. It kind of makes us wish we hadn't used the Ixalan's binding already, but we did. Well, I'm gonna drop the Lyra. We may have to sit here and play a longer game. Phoenix is a card that's kind of tough to attack through. And our opponent still has 3 cards in hand, which is worrisome. Especially because cards can get flashed in because of the Wrath. I do think we want to try to make an attack here with the Lyra and just kind of see what our opponent can do as far as blocking it. Okay, Justice Strike, so they did have a removal. And now we just can't do too much, unfortunately. Our Vivien did die earlier. Would be great in this type of situation as a way to draw more cards. Ooh, okay. And our opponent is going to start attacking with that Wrath. Really wishing we had somehow figured out to binding away the Phoenixes rather than the Resplendent Angel. And this is something that can happen with a deck with a bunch of lands and mana creatures and only so many powerful cards, is that you can flood out. And that's something that is just kind of a danger with the deck. We haven't drawn... Well, we're relying on our Planeswalkers, really, to get us those cards, and the one that we drew ended up dying, so that's a bit unfortunate. I mean, we're not out of it yet. We're still at 19 life, which is a pretty high life total. It's going to kind of come down to who can top deck better. So far, we're not top decking it quite as well as our opponent, I would say. Ooh, okay, now the Phoenixes, it looked like, are going to be coming in. That's probably, well, that is, okay, bad news. If our opponent starts attacking with those phoenixes, it could mean that our opponent has even more phoenixes. We're hoping that if our opponent has spells in hand, that they are copies of Resplendent Angel. Uh-oh. Oh, a Lyra of their own, huh? We're being beaten at our own game here. There's a Vivien. Well, it's not... We would have loved to have this earlier on. We pretty much have to get rid of the Lyra. And we still don't have any great attacks, unfortunately. Like, we could attack with the Carnage Tyrant. That does get double blocked, though. Well, maybe we do want to make an attack just to try to push through some damage. I mean, we might end up dying on the crackback, but I'm going to go ahead and start trying to get a little bit aggressive, because that seems like our best course of action. Leave the Llanowar back to block this Knight token. So we end up getting through for 8. Which is pretty good. Now, we couldn't kill our opponent here, actually. Oh, I guess I miscounted it. Sorry, I believe we got through for 6 damage there. Maybe it was 5. Alright, I think we got through for 5. Sorry about my bad math. But there was no way of us actually killing our opponent. The Carnage Tyrant trampled through for 2, and then these 3 creatures got in for 3. So I guess it was 5. Not really optimal there, but not sure if that was, if passing would have worked out either. And now our opponent probably is going to make a sizable attack back, kill off the Vivien Reid. Yeah, pretty safe attack. That makes sense. So we need to top deck something like a Lyra or another big spell here. Okay. Ask and you shall receive. So by making that big attack last turn, it kind of caused our opponent to not attack with as much there. Like, they didn't attack with their Rekindling Phoenixes. And we're still looking to draw like another Ixalan's Binding. Would be good to kind of, like, we have to try to get these Phoenixes under control. And we don't really have good attacks. Our opponent can just kind of either chump or triple block. And if we attacked with everything, that doesn't work out either. So yeah, we're kind of still hoping to draw more gas. But it looks like our opponent hasn't found too much either. There's a Carnage Tyrant. That's quite a good draw. We can just slam that down. And that's a card that, because it has trample, is definitely a way we can potentially push through. But it looks like our opponent found something. Oh, it's another Lyra. Now, that's interesting our opponent is casting that right away, because I believe because of the Wrath Compassion, that Lyra has Flash. Baffling End. What does that do for us, if anything? Not sure it does anything at this moment for us, unfortunately. So, just going to continue to sit back. Because of that Lyra, our attacks are no longer good. Our opponent probably should have waited until we attacked. As I mentioned earlier, our opponent's actually getting in with the Lyra, so we could block. Or we could save it for a crackback. Kind of a close decision, actually. We take it. I do like the ability to attack on the backswing with our Lyra. We'll try taking it. Not a great spot. If we block, we get completely blown out if our opponent has another Lyra, for whatever that's worth. And we can still gain the life on our attack. Although, if our opponent keeps playing spells, that's quite unfortunate. Curious what this is actually going to be. So, like, say we untap and we're to attack with everything. The Lyra probably gets chumped by a Phoenix. The Carnage Tyrant probably gets blocked by by two flyers. Our opponent puts the Knight in front of the Llanowar Elves. Yeah, still not the attack we would like. Okay, Lava Coil. So Lava Coil is just going to take out a Druid of the Cowl. That's kind of an aggressive move. Well, I think I'm just going to send the Lyra. Maybe it gets chumped by a Phoenix. Maybe it gets blocked by more than that. If our opponent triple blocks, it's definitely worse for us. And they did triple block. Yep, that's bad news. I think we had to try it and hope that our opponent didn't make this play, but they did, which is really bad for us. We ended up trading our Lyra for the Wrath. And it's one of those gambling plays. Had we attacked with everything, we would have lost the Carnage Tyrant. Could have played the Tocatli there, I guess, but I think we're in a rough spot now. It looks like it wasn't really going to matter too much either way. This Aurelia is presenting... Well, actually, our opponent had lethal before. Oh, but they're not attacking for lethal. That's odd to me. Well, maybe took a wrong turn there with the Ixalan's binding. Might have been the only way we could have salvaged that, maybe not using it on the Angel, but was hard to know exactly what was going on. So let's take a look at the sideboard. Our opponent isn't full-on control, but the Adanto Vanguards definitely have some appeal. A Johnny I like. And then some of the exile removal, like the Seal Away and Baffling End, look pretty good in the matchup. Some of our other 2-drops do not look as good, like the Tocatlis and the Knights. Baffling End also, I guess it's good against the Resplendent Angels. We saw histories, so we could board in Knights. Knight of Autumns for that reason. I sometimes like, when I board in the Adantos, just kind of boarding out more of the 2-mana plays. Knights come in when Tocatlis come out, in general. So I think maybe we keep in 2 Baffling Ends to deal with those histories, and then potentially, if our opponent boards in more enchantments, then the Knights become better. Sometimes you'll get opponents boarding in Ixalan's Bindings or Baffling Ends or cards like that. We don't really know, of course. This hand, we're missing a white source, which is pretty bad. If we are to immediately draw it, then we get bailed out. I think we do keep this on the back of, we really just want one more land to be able to get the Karn down on turn 3. And it's a high upside hand. Now if we go miss land, then the hand is very bad. But so I think that many players might mulligan this, but for me, this is a keep. Okay, and now the hand looks much better. Much better. And we're on the front foot rather. Elves into Adanto Vanguard. We don't know exactly what removal suite our opponent has, although it's likely that our opponent does have Teferi, even though we didn't see it. I think most of these Jeskai decks do have Teferis in them. The Knight of Grace isn't too scary. We can actually just go ahead and make our attack. And then comes the decision of what to do after that. I'm actually quite surprised our opponent blocked. Easy choice to make our Adanto Vanguard indestructible there. I think we want to Karn and just start getting an advantage this way. Tick Karn up just in case. We don't want to go all in on the constructs in case our opponent might have a sweeper. It looks like we found a land and a Carnage Tyrant there off of that uptick of our Karn. So Carnage Tyrant, it's not as amazing in the matchup because our opponent has a bunch of flying lifelinkers, but it's still good. There's the history, which was kind of to be expected. We know we're attacking with the Adanto Vanguard, kind of just regardless. And then I like just continuing to go upstairs with our Karn. And I'm going to get this history of Benalia down. We would happily trade. Trading Knights seems profitable. There's some argument to playing the binding on the history, but I think we want to wait for the binding because of Rekindling Phoenix that we saw in the previous game as a card that we are definitely wanting to be aware of and should be worried about, really. Lava Coil on a Llanowar Elves. Okay, that's interesting. Well, our opponent knows about the Carnage Tyrant. It looks like they're trying to prevent us and are going to prevent us from casting the Carnage Tyrant next turn. Well, I think we make our attacks first, see how our opponent responds to the attacks. And then we could construct here with Karn. I'm gonna go upstairs. I generally just like continuing. Go upstairs, go upstairs, go upstairs. And I'm gonna Baffling End at night. We're very ahead on board now. Next turn, we should be able to land the Carnage Tyrant if we so choose to. And yeah, we can afford to take 4. It looks like our opponent's actually just going straight at our life total there on that attack. And there's a Phoenix. We've been saving our binding for that card. And so, yep, I'm going to go ahead and use it. And this is perfect. It allows us to get in a nice big attack. If our opponent puts the knight on the Llanowar Elves, they're actually going to 1. So I think now we just kind of, or actually, I guess our opponent would have died if they put the knight on the Llanowar Elves. Yeah, so that block was forced, the knight on the Untitled Vanguard. And now we can make a construct. We have plenty of creatures. And it looks like our opponent hasn't found blue mana, has kind of not come out of the gate nearly as quickly, and we should be going on to a game 3 in short order. Yep, okay. So our deck definitely operated the way we wanted it to in that game. That's for sure. And I think there's a reasonable question to be asked, and that is, do we want to make any sideboarding changes on the draw? Druid of the Cowl is a reasonable option. I'm not sure we want to be on the Untitled Vanguard plan as much on the draw, because we want to be, we're not as likely to get the head start that we did in the last game. So I like just kind of going a little bit slower, I think. The Baffling Ends could be quite useful. Alright, I'm going to try this configuration. I think. This looks pretty good. The issue with the Untitled Vanguard is it doesn't, like, it's a great card, right? We know Untitled Vanguard is probably the best 2-drop in the format, but on the draw with this deck, you want to be able to protect your planeswalkers if you're relying on your late game. And so I think that, like, we're just trying to win on, like, turn 7, turn 8. We're not trying to play our 2-drop and have it go all the way. Also, our opponent's fairly likely to have some more answers if they have access to them to the Untitled Vanguard after seeing it in Game 2. And we now have access to all 3 of our Knight of Autumns for this exact sort of situation. We want to be able to get rid of the history right away. Just an extremely powerful card, a card that we have to be worried about. So if your Knight of Autumn essentially trades with the history of Benalia, you get rid of the history and then block the Knight, we're happy. We're happy with that exchange. Splendid Angel, that's a strong magic card. Strong magic card there. And now we have a decision. We could drop the Karn. I think I'm going to drop the Karn. It certainly... Well, it's fairly likely that it's not going to stick around for that long, but just being able to get some advantage out of it early, like we may want extra lands. We see a Settle the Wreckage being revealed there with the Karn, so it's not the best card to reveal to Karn because it allows your opponent to have that information that there is a Settle the Wreckage available. We want to be getting rid of this Resplendent Angel pretty soon because we certainly don't want to allow our opponent to start making tokens off of it. That would be a real problem if that were to happen. Okay, our opponent's making the play of just getting rid of our Karn. Well, I think I'm going to play out the history and kind of hope to lure our opponent into making a mistake by pumping the Angel. Because if our opponent pumps the Angel and attacks, then it's a very easy seal away there. It looks like they are not going to pump, though. I think we still seal away. Like they didn't have the 6th land, but I think we want to get the seal away out of our hand because we're going to play a 5-mana card next turn. And it looks like our opponent has a 4-mana threat. Okay, Ixalan's Binding. That is a little bit annoying. Although what we can do now is we can play out our Vivien Reid and just down tick on the Angel. So I think I'm going to just go with that. And we have 3 blockers, so our opponent could make a play like, say, Lightning Striking Vivien Reid. But I mean, we would love to untap with our Vivien on the battlefield. That's certainly true. And it looks like our opponent's just going for a pass. And now the history chapter goes off. We get a land. Do we want to play around, say, a Settle the Wreckage? I don't think so. Well, we can't send this Knight because it dies to the Knight of Grace. So pretty easy attack here to attack with the 2 tokens, I think. And yeah, we're not too bummed out there by the Settle. That's perfectly fine. And we're just going to follow up with this Lyra. Our opponent's only got 1 card in hand. And the game is unfolding exactly how we anticipated and wanted it to. And our opponent's just going to concede, so that's going to be it. Okay, well, we are going to be going first again, which is nice. And a pretty good hand. We're representing turn 3 Karn, which is a way to take over the game. So happily keeping this one. And we'll see what our opponent can do to combat this. It looks like we are against a white aggro deck, so should be interesting to see how this plays out, because we don't have a turn to play, unfortunately, which means that our opponent can get onto the board potentially faster than we can. Depends what they have here to follow up the Falcon. Healer's Hawk, is it another 1-drop as well? No, just the Hawk, okay. So that's could be manageable, I think. I'm going to play out the Karn, so we can start getting our card advantage engine going. We got 2 lands, but hey, that means we're not drawing those 2 lands that were sitting on top of our deck. And now our opponent may have to decide if they want to attack the Karn or go straight at us. But it looks like smart choice. They are gonna go for the Karn. Let's continue to see what we can find off of it. Now we have this Ixalan's Binding, which I think we really just need to use on this Benalia Marshal. And we're hoping that that kind of means that our opponent cannot kill off the Karn on this turn. It looks like we haven't found anything great off the Karn, but once again, that means that we're not drawing those cards, and our opponent's also forced to continue to attack Karn. We're still at a healthy life total. There's a Conclave Tribunal. Okay, so that's going to take care of the Ixalan's Binding. That's pretty annoying, actually. That's pretty good for our opponent. And now the Karn is down to 1 loyalty. So it is going to end up dying, it looks like. We would love that Ixalan's Binding there, but we just don't have time to have access to it. So really, no choice other than to just play out the Carnage Tyrant. A bit flooded at this particular point in time. And the Marshal's good. We would have loved for that Ixalan's Binding to just kind of stick. But our opponent had that Conclave Tribunal. And we don't really have even good attacks because we need the Carnage Tyrant to be able to block. So we're pretty likely to lose the game now, having flooded out. And we haven't drawn our best card in the matchup, Lyra. Have not drawn that one. It looks like this could just be straight up mono white. Could also be Boros, just not having drawn the Boros lands yet. Luxodon is just a 4/4 because we have Tocatli out, or a 6/6 because of the Marshals, but still only lands. That's frustrating. Well, our opponent has exactly 4 lands. We have 10. So, I mean, it can happen. We have a decent number of them in our deck, but that's a pretty good attack. I think we want to just chump block here. We could play the Binding, but we're still dead on board. Yeah, still dead on board. So, gonna concede. As far as sideboarding for the matchup, we do get some more tools. So we're taking out the Knights and the Tocatlis I also like bringing out. in favor of Knight of Autumn. Settle is good. Baffling End, Seal Away. We want just a bunch of removal for this particular matchup. And I like keeping in most of the Planeswalkers on the play. Ajani is the one, I think the weakest one. So sometimes I will just board out the Ajani. Keep in one Tocatli. It's a little bit, they are a little bit awkward though with the Knights. But they stop the Venerated Luxodon. Alright, well, we keep this. See what our opponent ends up coming up with. Our histories are not quite as good as in the white deck just because we don't have as many Knights or as many pump effects, but they're still good. Still History of Benalia is just one of the best white cards in the format. 3 Vivien Reids is more than we would like, especially if we're not going to be able to cast them. Hopefully we are going to be able to cast them, of course. Dento Vanguard, really not much of a surprise to see that card come down. Okay, well, we're going to be able to play out a Vivien next turn, it looks like. Unclear if that's going to be good enough, but it's what we got. We can of course, either go up with it, or take out an enchantment or flyer, and it looks like our opponent has both an enchantment and a flyer already on the battlefield. So this time, I like taking the hit. Next time, once we have a Planeswalker in play, we can then start to think more about blocking. Okay, well, this attack looks pretty free with the Knight because it has Vigilance. And then we can play out our Vivien Reid. There's definitely a question as to what to do with it, but for me, I like just getting these threats off the board and worrying about everything else later, so I'm going to take care of that Rushwing Falcon. And by doing that, our opponent doesn't have 3 creatures they can attack with to flip the Legion's Landing. And it looks like, yep, that's actually just going to be a concession. Okay. So we've evened the score up. Now we're on the draw, though, which is scary, right? It's not where you want to be against these white decks. Our Planeswalkers are not quite as great being on the draw. I like the Knight of Graces. They're not amazing, but we just need cheap cards, and that kind of fits the bill. I'm going to take out one of the Carnage Tyrants. They're just a little bit slow sometimes. Well, this is a hand. We have too much mana. I think we just mulligan this, unfortunately. And now we've got kind of the opposite where we're looking for lands, but we have to keep this, I think. Now there's a Seal Away. We're really looking for a green source, though, so I think we just put that Seal Away on the bottom. as painful as that is, we just kind of want lands with this hand to be able to churn out to play our Lyra. It's going to be sad if we don't get to get that card onto the battlefield this game. We have the Baffling End in case our opponent does play a Danto Vanguard here. And they do play a Danto Vanguard. So I like Baffling End and these exile removal spells a lot. We can still get our History of Benalia onto the battlefield. Although there's Benalish Marshal as well, so the hits keep on coming for our opponent. We really would like a green source. I guess we just used the Baffling End that we just drew to get rid of the Marshal. Our opponent still has 3 cards in hand, and there's a decent chance that they're just all gas, which is really worrisome. So we have no other choice. Drew Vivien Reid for turn. Play out our knight. Oh, there's Heroic Reinforcements, which is pretty bad news. I think I'm just gonna block, maybe. Yeah, I'm gonna take it. I'm just gonna hope that our opponent doesn't have another pump effect, because we can actually just like have better blocks this way. If our opponent has another reinforcements, we're just kind of dead anyways, I feel like. And we finally do the green source, but it's probably going to be too late if our opponent just goes Heroic Reinforcements here. I think that's just game. And there it is. So we have 3 blockers. We can technically stay alive here, I believe. So we have to throw something in front of a knight. Okay, so we can go to 1. Now I'm regretting not having traded on the last turn for sure. Well, we have 1 play now, and it's Lyra. Our opponent also has Conclave Tribunal. Then you just kind of gotta clap your hands and move on. Sometimes the Boros deck just has it. Alright, well, we're continuing to see an attack. Maybe they have a burn spell or something. Oh, make a stand. Ugh, that's brutal. That's frustrating. That is very frustrating. Alright, well, that's going to be the match. So we're on the draw. I'm going to start by mulliganing this. Ugh, lots of lands in both of these hands. 5 lands and a Planeswalker. I guess I'm going to try it. I hate going to 5. We saw in the finals of the Pro Tour what happens when you mulligan. Mulligans are not fun. We had 2 1 spell all land hands in a row, but I'm going to try keeping this one. And it looks like we're against white aggro. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise to see that, considering recent results. And it is going to be the life gain version. So the vampire gets in. That's going to pump up the Pridemate. We would love a Baffling End here. just to be able to answer the Ajani's Primate would be great. Ooh, another Karn. That's not great. Not what we wanted. We can play one of the Karns next turn, presumably, but we're taking so much damage, and this Primate is starting to get out of hand. Benalish Marshal. These white decks, man. These white decks do their thing, and they do it well. I mean, we mulligan into a subpar hand, but hey. Okay, so we found a Temple Garden and a Lyra Dawnbringer, but our opponent smartly is giving us the Temple Garden. Taking 2 off the Sacred Foundry is probably really bad news for us. And with 2 cards left, there's a lot of cards that just kind of do us in. Yeah, another Benalish Marshal. Okay, I've seen enough here to know that we're dead. That was just a great draw from our opponent on the play. I feel confident we can put up more resistance this game, though. We're going to board in Knight of Autumns, Settle, Seal Away, and Baffling End, so a lot of removal type stuff. We can still play... I think we want to play 1 Knight of Grace being on the play. Tocatli is not good in this matchup because normally the life gain version does not have Venerated Luxodon. Although there's all sorts of variations of the Boros deck running around right now, and a lot of them are very strong choices. Now, if we're able to get a Lyra into play quickly, or get a Planeswalker going quickly before we're just kind of run over, I think that this matchup is pretty close for the green-white side. But the Benalish Marshal is just one of the most powerful cards out of the white deck, because it just pumps up all of the other smaller creatures and the tokens, and is why we're seeing so many of these decks just kind of splash very little, because you want as many plains and white sources in your deck as possible in order to play that Marshal, and then you go Marshal into Marshal, and our opponent did that last game, and three copies of Karn, Scion of Urza. That's way too many. This hand is fine, not great. It's a little bit slow, so we don't want the Carnage Tyrant there. We would like, I mean, we can leverage our removal, so we're less likely to get immediately run over, but we do kind of need to get some sort of traction going. Maybe it's with the Vivien Reid, maybe it's with something else. So a big question for this turn is, do we want to seal away this Healer's Hawk? We could just take it, take the 1, and then see what our opponent does. It's certainly a fine option. Dauntless Bodyguard is going to protect the Healer's Hawk, it looks like. Although, oh, and there's a Leonin Vanguard to follow it up. Interesting. Well, if we get rid of the Hawk this turn, it means that we can play a number of spells next turn if we draw them. So I think we're in a spot where, like, if we draw History, we want to be able to History, or if we draw a Druid, we want to be able to play it. So there's like, yeah, so we drew the Druid, so we're happy that we played the Seal Away. It's just kind of like a gamble. Like, I think we'd rather get rid of one of the other threats with the Seal Away, but we want to be mana efficient as well. And now it's just kind of a time to cross our fingers a little bit, hope that there's no Benalish Marshal this turn, and that we can safely play out our Vivien Reid on the following turn, which it looks like is the case, surprisingly enough. The white deck does not have that busted draw that we're used to. Now, we could get Heroic Reinforcements, I guess, off this Vivien Reid, but not all of these decks play a bunch of Heroic Reinforcements. So I like just playing out the Vivien Reid and ticking up. And unfortunately, we did not get anything too good there. We just got a land. So hopefully it stays alive. What we do have is this Ixalan's Binding. So if our opponent does Conclave Tribunal, we can Binding and get back our Vivien Reid. So that is a sequence that's actually fairly likely to happen. So it's a good thing that we have the Ixalan's Binding at our disposal. But if our opponent can get more creatures onto the board right here, they are going to do it. So we'll see if that's what happens. Okay, yep, so it's a Conclave Tribunal, which is what we were expecting. So that takes care of the Vivien Reid, but we can Ixalan's Binding it. We have a Baffling End to deal with the creature, so I think we are favored right now in this game. We are favored. Certainly not over, but we're not under the same sort of early pressure that we were under in the previous game. We drew another Vivien. That's actually interesting. We could just play out that Vivien Reid and start using it, which is fairly attractive. But we could also just Ixalan's Binding the Tribunal. I think both options are pretty good. By Ixalan's Binding the Tribunal now, it stops future tribunals. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Like, I just don't want our opponent to... Like, our opponent could very easily, having not played a bunch of creatures, just have another Conclave Tribunal in hand already. That's certainly plausible. Okay, Knight of Autumn or Llanowar Elves are the choices for this. The nice thing about the Elves is we could just play a land and cast it. So I think I'm going to take that. Even though the Knight is definitely the more powerful card. We already have the Vivien Reid, so we're not as worried about the artifacts and enchantments. We're just kind of protecting our Vivien, get another creature onto the board, and then eventually we'll find a Carnage Tyrant or a Lyra to kind of put on more pressure. Well, I was not expecting that. There's a Demystify. That is extremely annoying. And that's going to take out our Ixalan's Binding and then our Vivien Reid. So, wishing I had taken that Knight. Venerated Loxodon. Okay, well, that was a pretty good turn for our opponent. And now it's a question of how we want to respond. We drew this Carnage Tyrant. I think we want to just cast that because it blocks our opponent's board. So I'm going to get the Carnage Tyrant out before deploying this other Vivien Reid. And we have the Baffling End, so as long as we are able to have a Planeswalker stay in play for a few turns, we should be able to take this down. The continuous life gain is definitely annoying by that Llanowar Vanguard. Okay. Well, I think we just slam the Lyra. We could also Baffling End this Llanowar Vanguard if we wanted to. I think we do that. So we'll Baffling End the Vanguard and play Lyra. So we still have Vivien Reid to protect against Conclave, another Conclave Tribunal for the Lyra, and if that does not happen, the Lyra Dawnbringer is just, I mean, this is our best card in the matchup. Taking a little bit conservative approach, not attacking there with the Carnage Tyrant because our opponent could very easily have a removal spell. And they do. They have this Conclave Tribunal. Well, we can play our Vivien Reid and tick it down on the Tribunal, which would give us a Vivien Reid and a Lyra Dawnbringer. So that seems really good. I'm going to definitely make that play. And still think we sit back. If our opponent has a third Conclave Tribunal, they're going to cast it here and continue to try to mess with our threats. If they don't, then we're in a good situation. It's pretty weird that our opponent has a bunch of spells in hand that they have not cast yet. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. But here's Benalish Marshal. So that's a creature that now, given the context of the game, we can manage. These upticks on Vivien Reid have not been good, particularly good for us. So definitely a question mark as to whether to attack with Lyra, but I think we do. You just want to start the process of gaining life. We have the Carnage Tyrant that can kill one of these big threats. And we didn't see heroic reinforcements earlier in the game, so I think it's fairly likely that we still won't see it. Okay, Danto Vanguard. Our opponent attacks. That is a little bit surprising, but we have 3 blockers, so we have a straightforward block here. We want to try to kill the Benalish Marshal and chump the other creatures. Our mana dorks, being this late in the game, are not going to be super valuable to us, but it looks like could be Make a Stand or Pride of Conquerors. Yeah, Make a Stand makes more sense. So we still keep the Vivien, but the attack does kill off 2 of our creatures, basically, is what it did. Okay, another Lyra. So that's a backup. And now, well, we've got a couple options, actually. We could just attack, which I kind of like doing. And then our opponent is just dead next turn, potentially. Yeah, why not? We attack. Our opponent's all the way down to 4. Now they need an immediate answer to the Lyra, and we have a follow-up Lyra, even if that happens. Oh wow, there is a heroic reinforcements. That's unexpected. I haven't done the exact math yet. So let's see, 3, this is 6, 11, 15, 21. Oh, okay, well we didn't do the math, but I believe we're going to 1, if that quick math is correct. Yeah, so we go to 1. And then win on the crackback. Surprised that our opponent did not play that heroic reinforcements earlier, or maybe they just drew it. Anyways, squeak that one out. Wasn't an easy game by any means. I don't mind having a little bit of life gain in the Death Gorge Scavengers. We're really just mostly relying on our removal spells. I think we just click back. Click back, we're on the draw. I mean, we're hoping for a fairly reactive hand. Knight of Autumn is really powerful if our opponent is relying heavily on Conclave Tribunals, which it appears that was the case. Like, our opponent had a good draw that game. Like, they basically only drew like 4 lands and a bunch of spells, which normally is gonna be enough to win, especially against a mulligan, and our hand wasn't amazing, but our answers really lined up well against what our opponent had. And they didn't have too much early pressure, so that heroic reinforcements at the end was pretty surprising and almost was just the game. But Lyra has a way of padding your life total. And our deck is not an easy deck to sideboard against, really. That our opponent may be thinking about, all right, what do we have in the deck? Because this is a unique build of Celestia. So if you haven't seen my exact list, which is what this is, then you don't know what's in the deck, which is an advantage. Like, it happens to be that Conclave Tribunal is not that great against us after sideboard because of all of our enchantment removal, but our opponent may not know that, or maybe thinking about that more for this game. Anyways, our opponent mulligan, so that makes mulliganing here feel a little bit better, but we do have to mulligan. Our opponent's going down to 5. This is a hand we can keep. We're just hoping to, well, if we draw planes, we can actually play the history on turn 2, or any white source, and our opponent's all the way down to 4. So this looks like it should be a pretty good game for us. No 1-drop there because of those mulligans. Sometimes with a super high power deck like the Boros deck is, you have to mulligan a lot because you're looking for those curve out starts, those 1 into 2 into Benalia Marshall type hands. And our deck is much more mid-rangey, so we're not going to have too many mulligan outs type situation. There's Demystify, but we still get a knight for our troubles, so that works out in our advantage. I'm not sure what to make of that card, Demystify. Certainly is a surprising card when cast, but in terms of its power level, it's not really super high. And we can just kind of sit back. If our opponent plays a creature, we can get rid of it, and then once we get the Vivien Reid down, we just take over the game. I don't really see how our opponent is going to win this one, actually. Seems unlikely, at least. Pretty high likelihood that there's 4 drops in our opponent's hand. We drew the land, which is perfect, so we can slam the Vivien. Carnage Tyrant or Lyra. Either one seem great. I'll take the Lyra, I guess. Lyra is legendary, which makes that decision kind of close, I think. But it's also just such an absurd card. And we don't have the 6th land yet, and we drew a Carnage Tyrant, so it's all working. We can just play the Carnage Tyrant here. And yep, our opponent's just going to concede. Well, we're doing pretty good on die rolls today, it looks like. And we have a decent hand, not knowing what the matchup is. No planeswalkers, but there's definitely a decent amount of decks that you can just play a Lyra and win, kind of win off of that. So we'll see what we're up against. It could be mono red, could be red blue, Arclight. In any case, taking out our Llanowar Elves is a smart decision by our opponent. I think I'm going to play out the Druid. It's possible we miss a damage by playing the Druid out here, but if we draw like a Karn or another 4-mana spell we might want to cast, we're going to be really happy to have the Druid already in play. And it is mono red. So Lyra is going to be very good. Our opponent's probably going to have to use 2 removal spells to try to kill it. But for now, I am content to sit back and see what happens. Okay, Lightning Strike makes sense. And Shock. Wow. Well, our opponent has really decimated all of our creatures. Now we're hoping that there's no experimental frenzy to follow it up. We found a Karn though. That's nice. It's a good draw. Can play it, and I like just going upstairs with our Karn. Get a history of Benalia that we have access to now. Alright, so our opponents actually just played out all of their cards now. So they're hellbent. Now they can get rid of our Karn, but then we play the Lyra. So Lyra's good. We're just going to jam it. We drew a Vivien Reid, which is also nice. And now our opponent probably just passes the turn, most likely. But it looks like instead they're just going to concede. A little bit early to concede, I think, there, but we were definitely a big favorite to win. Sideboarding, I like Knight of Autumn a lot. It gets rid of cards like Experimental Frenzy. It also gains life. And then Adanto Vanguard is a card that I also board in because I also like the Squire's Devotion. Now, admittedly, Adanto Vanguard isn't anything amazing in the matchup, but we have these Enters the Battlefields cards that we want access to, which means we're going to take out our Tocatlis and our Knights and our Llanowar Elves. So we're taking out a lot of our cheap cards. And then I normally take out one Carnage Tyrant. And then we also want the Sealaways and the Baffling Ends taking out a Karn. And need one more cut here. On the draw, I think going down all the way down to one Carnage Tyrant is also okay. Now, at the Pro Tour, I did get Carnage Tyrant into play alongside Squire's Devotion. That particular combination is really, really good. This hand is borderline. I think I'm going to keep it. If we draw Squire's Devotion to put on the Vanguard, the hand becomes great, but we still have Baffling End and Adanto Vanguard. We're just looking to kind of answer our opponent's threats. Now, having to pay a bunch of life to keep your Vanguard around that part is kind of not super fun, but it does happen, and because we're boarding out a decent amount of the mana creatures, we kind of have to keep these mana heavy hands, and we drew a land for our first draw step. Hopefully we don't continue to draw them though. I am just going to use the Baffling End right away, because the Runaway Steamkin is probably the most worrisome creature in the red deck, especially if left unanswered. And there's another one. So that one we just don't have an answer to, point blank. And we have a bit of a decision to make. Interesting draw step there. I'm going to play out the Druid because I think there's a fairly high likelihood our opponent just uses a removal spell to get rid of it, and we don't really want to play the Vanguard yet because our opponent could very easily still have a Goblin Chain Whirler in their hand. Okay, Viashino Pyromancer. Do they have an additional card as well? Oh, yep, it's a Wizard's Lightning. So that takes care of our Druid. So we're under quite a bit more pressure this game than we were in the previous one. Karn is an interesting draw. Not sure we want to play it at the moment, though. I like the idea of getting the Deathgorge Scavenger out to gain some life. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Now, if our opponent has another spot removal spell, they probably just point it at the Deathgorge Scavenger. And that is what's going to happen. So, needed a decent draw step here for sure. Unfortunately, just a Sun Petal Grove. Well, I think we just play out the Karn now. I'm going to go ahead and tick it up. But I think we're in a pretty bad spot. Settle or another Scavenger. So those are both actually pretty good cards. Wonder which one our opponent wants to give us. We got the Deathgorge Scavenger. So will our opponent attack Karn or just go straight at us here? That is a question. Looks like just straight away at our life total. So now we're all the way down to 5. And a Chain Whirler puts us down to 4. Well, I think we can minus the Karn to get the settle. And the Adanto Vanguard, when you don't draw the Squire's Devotion, is pretty miserable. But we're just going to play it out. Yep. So now we just have to use the Settle the Wreckage. We don't have a choice. And our opponent knows that. And it's also quite possible our opponent could have an Experimental Frenzy. in hand. So we're able to gain a little bit of life, but unfortunately we're going to be losing that life gain back, and we're dead to a number of cards here that our opponent could potentially play. Okay, it's an experimental frenzy. That's not to be unexpected. So what happened there is our opponent made 3 red mana with the Steamkin, but by doing so, they actually lost their runaway Steamkin. Still don't have what we're looking for, so we can continue to tick the Karn up. We've found a Lyra that we can have access to next turn, if we make it to next turn. Which we're not going to, because our opponent has that Gitu Lava Runner, so assuming that they attack with both of these creatures, yep, that's going to be that game. Okay, so not really too surprised by our opponent's sideboard plan there. We can afford to go slightly bigger, I think, after being on the, so now we're on the play, and I think we want to can shave one of the histories. History is good, certainly, but we can shave some of our bigger spells. Not really doing too much differently compared to the last game, honestly. Nope, not enough lands. Have to mulligan that one. This hand is okay. I mean, we're certainly going to have to keep it. There's an Adanto Vanguard on top of our deck. We don't have the Squire's Devotion, though, so I think we just put that on the bottom. We're really looking to assemble Adanto Vanguard plus Squire's Devotion, but if we don't have the Squire's Devotion, then the Vanguard isn't nearly as good. We're also looking for lands. Otherwise, I would have kept it, because it is fodder for Death's Gorge Scavenger as a way to gain some life and a 2-drop, but there's Runaway Steamkin, and unfortunately, once again, it may be very good for our opponent because we don't have our removal spell for it at the moment. And no creature in the graveyards means we're just playing out this Death's Gorge Scavenger, not the way we really wanted to start the game, but we'll make the play nonetheless. And our opponent's just kind of running out a number of spells here to get this Runaway Steamkin up to a 4/4. Interesting. So our opponent decides to cash in those Fanatical Firebrands. And we have the Lyra ready to go for next turn. The problem is, how can we best get to the next turn? I think the Deathgorge Scavenger may be the best play. It could very easily die. But I'm going to play it out there. Gain us some life. And if our opponent just has lands or creatures, like, this could be good, but if it could also be a removal spell. Okay, Chain Whirler. Hopefully there's not another Chain Whirler. That would be a blowout. And there is. So now our Scavenger dies to those two Chain Whirlers. And we're in a corner, but we have Lyra Dawnbringer. So we're not actually out of this, as grim as it may seem. I'm going to cast the Lyra and hope that this just completely slows down our opponent. Okay, Viashino Pyromancer is pretty annoying. That's going to bring us all the way down to 7. And unfortunately, our only real action here is the Karn. So we do want to play that. And I think... Let's see, I think we want to... Do we want to minus the Karn? Let's see. We can go up to 12, and then our opponent has... Yeah, we want to minus the Karn here. It does mean that if our opponent draws something like a Chain Whirler, it's an absolute disaster. But we're just kind of trying to stay alive here. And the construct helps us to do that. Now, if our opponent draws a Lightning Strike, it's interesting. It's interesting. Because where do they want to point that? Is a very real question, but we're hoping that it's just a land. That's really what we're gambling on. Now, if our opponent starts attacking with these Chain Whirlers, what this means is that they found a Lightning Strike, and they are looking to trade a removal for a Lyra, a removal and a Chain Whirler, and there's not really much we can do about it other than to let this happen. So yeah, Wizard's Lightning is effectively a Lightning Strike, as I was saying. And now we're kind of back to the drawing board a little bit. Drew a history. This time, I think we want to just kind of get a little bit desperate almost and just tick our Karn up, hope to find something good. The history allows us to not die immediately, so that's nice. Still have some decent top decks, but our opponent has been drawing, has 4 lands in all spells, which is, I guess this now is just lethal, it looks like, so just a really good, solid draw from our opponent, and yep, that's gonna do it.